Hello and welcome to the first podcast for the Booze Ambulance. I'm delighted to be joined by writer Steve Sunderland. Are you all right, Steve?
Very well, thank you.
Good. Can you just give us a little bit of background to this wonderful script that you've given us to produce?
What can I say about it? I wrote it about a year and a half ago, probably. I just was trying to look for a way of writing something comedic that had something to say as well at the same time, really. And I guess alcohol being both a friend and foe, which seemed to me to be quite a good opportunity to do some sort of comedy. I thought it could have been quite tragic at the same time, and it kind of is. It's in and out of both, really. I'd call it a psychological comedy.
Have you developed it any further?
Yeah, well, I started off by thinking of it as a drama, and then it seemed to peter out quite quickly. So I thought of it as a comedy. And I think it was when I started thinking of it as a comedy that I did definitely start to think of it as at least 6 parts. In fact, I've got 2 series in mind for it, but I've planned the first 6 episodes of it, which would be a 6x30 single story, really, about Frankie trying to stay off the substance that he loves.
So we're trying to produce it as a standalone piece and rewritten it as such. Do you have any advice for our students? I'm thinking really about visual style. How did you see it playing?
If you think of it visually, I think of it as a sort of single camera sort of comedy. Style-wise, it's an unusual one, really, because the characters really are all kind of embodiments of his head. So they shouldn't necessarily feel naturalistic, really. So going back in time to sort of comedies that might have influenced it in one way or another, I think sort of right the way back to the 70s, series like The Fall and Rise of Reginald Perrin would have been a starting point, because all of the characters in The Fall and Rise of Reginald Perrin really are inside Reggie's head. They're larger than life, they're kind of caricatures, they're hysterical, they don't abide by the rules. And that's because all of the characters are sort of part of his disintegration. So that really was one kind of source of inspiration, if you like. Another source of inspiration over the last 3 or 4 years when I watched it, I think I was probably late coming to it, and it's not that easily accessible, I don't think, is an Australian comedy called Wilfred, which is about a couple, and the girl has a dog, and the dog is played by a bloke in a suit, and he's really kind of an embodiment in a way of the male character's kind of paranoia. So the idea of playing things quite flatly and absurdly and deadpan, and then moving into kind of bits of shrill hysteria seemed to me to be sort of the style I was looking for, based on the idea that it's about kind of withdrawal from a dependency and what kind of frame of mind that puts you in. That's kind of it, I think. I was thinking about it. There's lots of visual references in it overall as a series that put me in mind of things like Spaced as well, because it's quite televisual as far as it's a bit postmodern. It's got references to other things in it as part of its comedy. So, yeah, those are some of the things. So I'd say playing it flat, really, or playing it really high, but never quite in the middle. Or there's only about one character, really. I guess that's his ex-partner, Deb, who's kind of straight. The rest of them are nutty in one way or another, because they're all part of him.
In terms of sound design, have you heard it in your head? What does it sound like? Do any characters have incidental music, for example? Or
no, I hadn't even thought about that, to be honest. I didn't think of scores. No, I don't go as far as that. Obviously, way away from kind of laughed tracks and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So
probably, if anything, it's sort of cinematic ambience at times. There might be some oddness that comes more from a kind of indie film world than from comedy, really. I think, again, going back to something like Spaced used sound quite well in a cartoony kind of way. And maybe some of that, but I haven't really thought about sound, to be honest.
Yeah,
but yeah, something that would enhance the sort of disjointedness going on in his head, which is the story. So yeah, the sound could be quite boingy and mad, really, if you wanted it to be.
Yeah. Certainly some of the ideas that we've been discussing with the sound designers, they're quite influenced by some of the students I've spoken to saying, I can see it, I can hear and see a lot of Edgar Wright in it, but I don't know how you'd feel about that.
Yeah, no, it could be done like that, definitely. I think if you did try to do it as an Edgar Wright, you'd probably end up being a bit of a kind of Edgar Wright substitute, though, so it might be worth thinking about another way of doing it altogether.
Right.
If you're looking for something new. It's not the sort of comedy that's meant to just be alongside other things in that respect, like you'd expect, really, trying to do something that's somewhere between film and comedy.
Mm-hmm.
So something filmic, but I'm not quite sure what.
Okay, let's ask you some general questions about, why do you write?
I like writing because I discover things about the world and about me through it, really. And sometimes it's a bit like a kind of therapy well.
What sort of stories excite you?
You mean in comedy terms or in any?
Really.
I'm very much into sort of in terms of cinema and things like that. I'm very much into cinema that plays in a sort of psychological world where you're using the screen and you're using cameras and using sound to point out the instability of things rather than the stability, and getting inside frames of mind and things that head towards the surreal or the absurd.
Could you give us a couple of examples?
What have I just seen? Cinema-wise, I've just been to see Personal Shopper. That was really good. That's a kind of ghost story, but it's really playful in the way that it uses the medium. In terms of films that I've liked over the last few years, films like Kill List by Ben Wheatley.
Yeah.
I just like those kinds of things where you're using the lens and sound and the rest of it to enter into what it might be like to be inside someone, not just watching them as three-dimensional stick, figures to play in a chess game with a narrative, but actually the story's about the inner quality of someone. So the stories are a way of talking about the inside of someone. Those are the kind of things I like, really. The Shining is a good example as a film, I suppose, because I don't think that's really a ghost story. That's just about a nervous breakdown. And all the characters are populating somebody's head. And that, in a way, is, again, referring back to the Booze Ambulance, there's sort of influence of that kind of filmmaking in it.
Excellent. Well, I'd just like to thank you on behalf of the module and the students, and we're going to do our very best to bring it to life and do it justice.
I'm sure you are, yeah. I look forward to it. It'd be good.
Okay, I'd like to thank Steve Sunderland, and hopefully he'll keep in touch with us and let us do regular updates with him.
Definitely, yeah.